If you'd asked me 8 years ago whether I believed love was something you could choose, I would have answered without hesitation. Yes. I had already spent decades fixing broken things for a living. Furnaces that refused to start in the dead of winter. Air conditioners that quit during the hottest weeks of July. Compressors, heat pumps, electrical panels. Every problem had a cause, every failure had a solution. That was the kind of man I was. I believed that if you showed up, worked hard, stayed honest, and refused to walk away, eventually things held together. I thought families worked the same way. My name is Ethan. I'm 47 years old, and I own a small HVAC company that I built from the ground up with blistered hands, 16-hour workdays, and more sleepless nights than I care to remember. Nothing in my life ever came easy. Maybe that's why Michelle felt like a blessing when she walked into it. She wasn't looking for a hero. She wasn't looking for someone to rescue her. She was simply exhausted. Divorced. Raising 2 children alone. Trying to pretend everything was under control when it clearly wasn't. Kyle was 11. Olivia had just turned 9. They were quiet around me in the beginning. Careful. Curious. They watched every move I made like they were trying to figure out whether I'd disappear like everyone else eventually did. Their biological father already had one foot out the door. Some months he'd call. Some months he wouldn't. Birthdays were forgotten. School events came and went. Promises were made with frightening confidence and broken with even greater consistency. The kids stopped expecting him long before I met them. I remember the first Christmas we spent together. Kyle wanted a bicycle. Olivia wanted one of those giant dollhouses she'd circled 100 times in a catalog. Michelle kept saying we couldn't afford both. I bought both anyway. Not because I wanted to impress anyone. Because children shouldn't have to lower their expectations just because adults failed them. The look on their faces that morning. I still remember it. Kyle actually hugged me. Olivia climbed into my lap while she opened every tiny piece of furniture inside that dollhouse. Michelle cried in the kitchen when she thought nobody was watching. That was the moment I convinced myself something dangerous. I thought we were becoming a family. Looking back now, I realize hope can be the most expensive thing a man ever buys. Years passed faster than I expected. My business grew. Not enough to make me rich. Enough to make us comfortable. Comfortable meant vacations every summer. Comfortable meant everyone had decent phones. Comfortable meant health insurance. New clothes before school started. Christmas without checking price tags. Birthday dinners wherever they wanted to eat. Comfortable meant Kyle never had to wonder who was paying for football equipment. It meant Olivia got dance lessons because she loved them. It meant braces. Laptops. Car insurance. Gas money. Senior pictures. Prom dresses. Graduation expenses. When Kyle turned 16, I helped him buy his first car. Nothing flashy. A reliable Honda that I'd inspected myself. I paid for new tires before handing him the keys because I didn't trust the old ones. He barely looked at me. His eyes stayed on the car. I told myself teenagers were like that. When Olivia got her license, I helped with hers too. Insurance wasn't cheap. Neither were repairs. Neither were oil changes. Neither were the 100 little emergencies that seem to appear every month when you're raising kids. I handled all of them. Quietly. Without keeping score. Michelle would sometimes tell me I didn't have to do so much. I'd laugh. That's what dads do. The words slipped out naturally. Dad? Not because anyone called me that. Because that's how I saw my role. I never tried replacing their biological father. I couldn't. But I believed there was room in a child's life for another man who simply stayed. I stayed. Every school meeting. Every late-night pickup. Every emergency. Every broken water heater. Every flat tire. Every panic call that started with, "Ethan, can you help?" And I always did. Always. I honestly believed consistency mattered more than biology. That one day Kyle and Olivia would look back and realize who had actually been there. Who paid the bills. Who answered the phone. Who never disappeared. I wasn't buying their love. I was investing in a future where they would finally look at me and see family. I had no idea that, all those years, I was building a house on a foundation that had already begun to crack. The first cracks did not appear all at once. They came quietly. A look held a second too long. A door slammed after I asked a simple question. A sarcastic laugh when I reminded Kyle that rent, food, electricity, and insurance did not pay for themselves. Olivia rolling her eyes when I asked where she was going and when she planned to return. Small things. At least, that was what Michelle called them. They're growing up, she would say. They're trying to find their independence. Independence. That word became the blanket she threw over every act of disrespect. Kyle was 20 by then. Olivia was 18. Both still lived in my house. Both still used phones paid for through my company plan. Their cars were insured under my name because the rates were lower. The groceries filling the refrigerator came from my account. The streaming services, the internet, the electricity they wasted by leaving every light on, all mine. But my voice had begun to offend them. The same voice they called when something broke. The same voice that answered when Kyle's car died 40 miles from home in the rain. I left a customer's furnace half disassembled that night because he sounded scared. I drove through a storm, found him beside the highway, and spent 2 hours replacing a failed alternator under the weak light of my service van. He sat inside with the heater running. He never thanked me. The next morning, he complained that grease from my hands had stained his steering wheel. I stood there looking at him, waiting for the shame to arrive. It never did. Olivia was worse in a quieter way. She had learned how to wound without raising her voice. She spoke to me with a cold politeness that made every sentence sound like an accusation. When she wanted money, I was Ethan. When she was angry, I was her mother's husband. Never family. One Friday night she came home after 2 in the morning. Michelle had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for her. I had not. I was sitting at the kitchen table when the headlights swept across the front windows. Olivia entered smelling of alcohol and perfume. "Where were you?" I asked. She froze with one hand still on the door. "Out. You were supposed to be home before midnight." She laughed. Not nervously. Cruelly. "You don't get to give me a curfew. As long as you live here, there are rules." She dropped her purse on the counter and stared at me as though I were an insect crawling across her food. "You're not my father." The words should not have surprised me. I had heard versions of them before. Not so clearly. Not with such hatred. I looked toward the living room, expecting Michelle to rise, to defend me, to remind her daughter whose house she was standing in. Michelle was awake. I could see her eyes open in the darkness. She had heard everything. She closed them again. That silence hurt more than Olivia's words. I turned back to the girl whose braces I had paid for, whose dance recitals I had attended, whose first car I had helped repair after she backed it into a concrete post. "I may not be your father," I said, "but I have treated you like a daughter." She picked up her purse. "That was your choice." Then she walked upstairs. Her bedroom door slammed. Something inside me moved that night. It did not break. Not yet. But it shifted. The next morning, Michelle acted as though nothing had happened. She made coffee. She asked whether I planned to work Saturday. She told me Olivia had been tired and probably had not meant what she said. I watched her stir sugar into her cup. She knew exactly what she meant. Michelle sighed. "Ethan, please. Don't make this bigger than it is." I almost asked how large an insult had to become before I was allowed to feel it. Instead, I went to work. Work had always been easier than home. Machines were honest. A cracked heat exchanger did not pretend to love you while poisoning the air. A burned wire did not blame you for noticing the smoke. At home, everything had become uncertain. Kyle began inviting friends over without asking. They emptied the refrigerator, left bottles on the patio, and laughed loudly into the early morning. When I told him it had to stop, he leaned against the kitchen counter with his arms folded. "You act like you own everybody. I own this house. There it is," he said. "Everything is about your money." "My money." He said it with disgust while wearing shoes I had bought him. I told him he needed to start contributing. Not much. A few $100s each month. Something to teach him that adulthood came with weight. His expression changed. "You're charging us to live with our mother? I'm asking two adults to take responsibility." He looked toward Michelle. As always, she was there. As always, she hesitated. "Maybe we should discuss this privately," she said. Kyle smiled. He knew what her answer meant. I was alone. That evening, Michelle told me I was pushing too hard. She said Kyle was struggling to find direction and Olivia was under stress. She said they needed compassion, not rules. I asked her what I needed. She had no answer. The arguments became more frequent after that. Every boundary I set was called control. Every expectation became an attack. Every reminder of what I provided was labeled manipulation. They wanted all the benefits of having me in their lives without accepting any obligation to respect me. And Michelle kept standing between us, not to protect me, but to soften every consequence I tried to impose. I began staying later at the shop. Sometimes I sat alone in my office long after the technicians had gone home. I listened to the building settle around me and stared at the family photograph on my desk. 7 years captured in a silver frame. Michelle beside me. Kyle and Olivia in front. Everyone smiling. I studied my own face and wondered how a man could look so happy while being so thoroughly mistaken. The final argument began over nothing. A missing tool. One of my expensive torque wrenches had disappeared from the garage. I found the empty case behind a stack of boxes and asked Kyle whether he had borrowed it. He barely looked up from his phone. "I sold it." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. "You did what?" "I needed cash. That tool belonged to me." He shrugged. "You have plenty." My hands went cold. I told him he had one day to get it back. He stood slowly, his face tightening. "You don't tell me what to do. I am telling you to return what you stole." He stepped closer. Behind him, Olivia appeared in the hallway. Michelle came down the stairs, drawn by the raised voices. Kyle pointed a finger at my chest. "You're not my real dad. You have no right to order me around." Olivia folded her arms. "He's right." I looked at Michelle. This was her moment. 7 years of marriage stood between us, waiting to see which side she would choose. She whispered my name. Only my name. A warning for me to calm down. Not for them to stop. For me. I understood then that the house had never truly been mine, no matter whose name was on the deed. I was allowed to provide. Allowed to repair. Allowed to pay. But I was not allowed to matter. I walked past them without another word. Outside, the evening air was cold. My car sat beneath the garage light, polished and silent. I did not know Kyle and Olivia would follow me later. I did not know they would carry tools. I did not know that, before sunrise, they would cross a line no apology could ever erase. I barely slept that night. Not because of the argument. Arguments had become part of the house, like the hum of the refrigerator or the creak in the hallway floor. You stopped noticing them after a while. What kept me awake was something else. Kyle's eyes. There had been anger in them before. Arrogance. Entitlement. This time there had been something colder. Something that didn't belong in the face of a young man looking at the person who had raised him. Hatred. I left before sunrise, as I always did. My technicians expected me at the shop by 6. We had 3 commercial maintenance contracts scheduled, and summer was our busiest season. Air conditioners never seemed to fail when people were comfortable. They waited until the hottest day of the year. The driveway was still wet from the night's rain. I unlocked my truck, tossed my lunch bag onto the passenger seat, and climbed inside. Something felt wrong. Not obvious. Just different. The brake pedal seemed softer when I backed out. I frowned but kept moving. Halfway to the main road, I pressed the brakes approaching a stop sign. The pedal dropped almost to the floor. The truck barely slowed. Every instinct I had screamed at me. I pumped the brakes. Nothing. My heartbeat exploded inside my chest. A pickup crossed the intersection less than 2 seconds later. If I hadn't started braking early. If I'd been driving my normal speed. I don't even like finishing that thought. I yanked the emergency brake, downshifted hard, and managed to roll onto the gravel shoulder before the truck finally stopped. For nearly a minute I couldn't breathe. My hands shook so violently I couldn't fit the key back into the ignition. Finally I climbed out and looked underneath. Brake fluid. Everywhere. Fresh. Still dripping onto the gravel. I called one of my mechanics. 20 minutes later he crawled under the truck, then slowly rolled back out. His face had lost all color. "Ethan." "What?" "Somebody cut your brake lines." I stared at him. "No." He nodded once. "Not where?" "Not corrosion. They were sliced clean." I looked back toward the highway. Cars passed only a few feet away. People heading to work. Parents taking children to school. None of them had any idea how close another wreck had come to happening that morning. My mechanic spoke quietly. "This wasn't an accident." I drove home in his truck. Every mile tightened something inside my chest. I wasn't thinking about insurance. I wasn't thinking about repair costs. I was trying to understand who could hate me enough to do something like this. By the time I pulled into the driveway, another thought had already formed. The security cameras. 2 years earlier, after someone stole tools from one of my service vans, I installed cameras covering every entrance, the garage, and the driveway. I almost never checked them. Until that morning. Michelle looked confused when I walked through the front door. "Aren't you supposed to be at work?" I walked past her. Straight to my office. She followed. "What happened?" I didn't answer. My hands moved across the keyboard almost automatically. The recording loaded. 11:48 p.m. The driveway appeared beneath the porch light. Nothing. 11:56. The garage door opened. Kyle stepped outside. Alone. I felt my stomach tighten. He looked around before walking toward my truck. A minute later Olivia joined him. She carried something in her hand. They crouched beside the driver's side front wheel. Kyle disappeared underneath the truck. Olivia held up the flashlight from her phone. They stayed there for almost 4 minutes. Then they stood. Kyle laughed. Actually laughed. Olivia shoved his shoulder. The two of them hurried back inside. The garage door closed. The recording ended. For a long time neither Michelle nor I spoke. She was standing behind me now. I could hear her breathing. "No," she whispered. "No." I rewound the footage. Played it again. Then again. Every angle. Every second. Every movement. There was no misunderstanding. No stranger. No vandal. No mistake. Only the 2 children I had spent 7 years loving as my own. Michelle covered her mouth. "They wouldn't." I paused the video exactly where Kyle looked directly into the camera before crawling beneath my truck. "They did." She began crying. "There has to be an explanation." I turned toward her slowly. "What explanation ends with cut brake lines?" She couldn't answer. Neither could I. An hour later both of them walked into the house together. Laughing. Kyle stopped first when he saw me sitting in the living room. Olivia noticed the television. The paused image. Their faces. The truck. The flashlight. Either of them spoke. I picked up the remote and pressed play. The room filled with silence louder than any shouting match we'd ever had. 4 minutes later the video stopped. Kyle swallowed hard. He looked at Olivia. "It isn't what it looks like." I almost smiled. Because guilty people always said the same thing. It looks, I said quietly, like the two of you crawled under my truck last night. It was a joke, Olivia blurted out. A stupid prank. Kyle nodded so quickly it almost looked painful. We weren't trying to hurt you. We just wanted to scare you. I swear. You swear? My voice barely sounded like my own. You cut the brakes on a 2-ton vehicle. Kyle stepped toward me. We didn't think. I know. I stood. For the first time in years, both of them stepped backward. We didn't think you'd leave that early. We thought you'd notice. We thought. You thought. I interrupted. That cutting someone's brakes was funny. Olivia was crying now. We never meant for anyone to get hurt. I looked from one face to the other. Faces I had watched grow up. Faces I had defended. Faces I had loved. Then I remembered the brake pedal sinking to the floor. The intersection. The truck passing in front of me. The life that had nearly ended because two adults wanted a laugh. Something inside me became perfectly still. Not anger. Not grief. Certainty. In that moment, I realized there are insults you can forgive. There are betrayals you can survive. But once someone decides your life is an acceptable price for their amusement, they have already stopped being family. Michelle moved first. She crossed the room and reached for Olivia, pulling her into her arms as though she were the victim. Olivia buried her face against her mother's shoulder and sobbed. Kyle stood beside them, pale and trembling, looking everywhere except at me. I watched the three of them gather together. A family closing ranks. And once again, I was outside it. Ethan, Michelle whispered, please don't do anything yet. Anything. She meant the police. She meant consequences. She meant the kind of response any reasonable person would have after discovering that two adults had deliberately sabotaged his vehicle. I looked at her. What exactly are you asking me to wait for? She glanced at Kyle and Olivia before answering. They're scared. They're not thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking clearly either when my brake pedal hit the floor. Olivia cried harder. Kyle rubbed both hands over his face. We said we were sorry. I stared at him. No. You said it was a prank? Because it was. A prank ends with embarrassment. Maybe anger. Maybe a broken window or damaged property. I stepped closer. A prank doesn't leave a man rolling toward an intersection without brakes. Kyle's expression tightened. We didn't know that would happen. You cut the lines. We thought there was some backup system. For 1 second, I could only look at him. Then something like laughter tried to rise inside me. It never reached my mouth. A backup system. That was the depth of thought they had given my life. They had crawled under my truck with a tool, sliced through the brake lines, and trusted some imaginary mechanism to save me from the consequences of their hatred. Michelle placed herself between us. They made a terrible mistake. No, I said. A mistake is turning left when you should turn right. This required planning. Her face crumpled. Please. They're my children. There it was. Not our children. Hers. Blood had returned the moment accountability entered the room. For 7 years, I had been expected to call them mine whenever money was needed, whenever the car broke down, whenever tuition, insurance, clothes, food, or vacations had to be paid for. But now that they had nearly killed me, they belonged only to her. I nodded slowly. Yes. They are. Michelle searched my face, perhaps hoping to find the man who had always surrendered. The man who swallowed every insult to preserve peace. The man who mistook endurance for love. He was gone. I walked into my office and removed 2 large trash bags from the cabinet. Then I went upstairs. Behind me, Michelle called my name. I did not stop. Kyle followed me into the hallway. What are you doing? I entered his room and opened the closet. I'm packing your things. His fear hardened into anger. You can't throw me out. I took his clothes from their hangers and placed them in the bag. This is my house. My mom lives here. Your mother didn't cut my brakes. Olivia appeared in the doorway, wiping tears from her face. Where are we supposed to go? I looked at her. Call your father? Her mouth fell open. He doesn't have room. Then call a friend. This is insane. No. Insane was what you did last night. Kyle grabbed the bag from my hand and threw it across the room. Clothes spilled onto the floor. You don't get to decide this by yourself. I turned toward him. For years I had avoided using my size against him. I had lowered my voice when he raised his. I had walked away when he pushed too far. I never wanted him to think I was trying to dominate him. That morning, I did not move aside. He saw something in my face and stepped back. I already decided. Michelle hurried into the room. Ethan, stop. We need to talk. We talked for 7 years. This isn't a normal argument. You're right. In a normal argument, no one tries to kill me afterward. They weren't trying to kill you. Her answer came too quickly. Too naturally. I looked at my wife and understood that she had already chosen the version of the story she needed to believe. A prank. A mistake. Children acting foolishly. Anything except the truth. Because the truth would force her to stand beside me. It would force her to admit that her children had become dangerous under the shelter of her excuses. I could have died. I said. She lowered her eyes. But you didn't. 4 words. Quiet. Almost gentle. They destroyed what remained of our marriage. But you didn't. As though survival erased intent. As though the absence of a funeral meant there had been no crime. I studied the woman I had loved and realized she was more frightened of her children losing comfort than of losing me beneath the wheels of my own truck. I resumed packing. This time, nobody stopped me. I filled 6 bags between the 2 bedrooms. Clothes. Shoes. Chargers. Toiletries. The belongings they had accumulated through years of my labor. I carried everything downstairs and placed it on the porch. Kyle and Olivia stood in the living room while Michelle cried between them. I retrieved my tablet from the kitchen and changed the entry codes to the front door, garage, and security system. Each confirmation sounded final. Beep. 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 The noise of a house closing itself against betrayal. Kyle watched me. You planned this. No. You did. Olivia's voice shook. Are you calling the police? I considered the question. The footage was saved in 3 places. My mechanic had photographed the lines. The evidence was enough. I could have ended their futures with 1 call. I could have watched officers place them in handcuffs on the same driveway where they had knelt beneath my truck. Part of me wanted that. A darker part. The part that still remembered the brake pedal collapsing beneath my foot. But I did not pick up the phone. Not today, I said. Relief moved across their faces. It disgusted me. They thought mercy meant weakness. They still did not understand. I opened the front door. Take your things and leave. Michelle stepped forward. Ethan, please. Give them a few days. They had 7 years. 1 night shouldn't erase everything. 1 night revealed everything. Kyle lifted 2 bags. His eyes burned with hatred. You'll regret this. I almost answered. Then I noticed how familiar the threat sounded. Not remorse. Not shame. Another warning. I held the door wider. Get out. They carried their belongings to Olivia's car. Michelle followed them down the path, pleading with me from the driveway, begging me to reconsider, promising counseling, apologies, repayment, anything that would restore the arrangement they had destroyed. I stood in the doorway. Silent. Kyle loaded the last bag. Olivia got behind the wheel. Before closing the passenger door, he looked back at me. For 7 years, I had waited for him to see me as family. That morning, he finally saw me clearly. Not as a father. Not as a provider. As the man who had stopped being useful. The car disappeared at the end of the street. Michelle remained outside. She stared at the empty road, then turned toward me with tears on her face. You threw away my children. I shook my head. No, Michelle. I looked toward the driveway where my damaged truck had been parked hours earlier. They threw me away first.